He was born in a small village called Asare, tucked between two hills in a region where the roads were unpaved and the electricity came only sometimes. The houses were built from mud and old wood. The children played in the dust. The elders sat under trees and talked about the past, because the past, at least, had been kinder than the present. Kofi was the third son of a farmer named Kofi Mensah, a quiet and hard-working man who spent his entire life growing yams and cassava on a small piece of land that barely produced enough to feed 6 mouths. Emmanuel never complained. He believed that if a man worked hard enough, the land would reward him. But the land did not always agree. By the time Kofi turned 23, his father had passed away, leaving behind a house that needed repairs, a small debt with the local shopkeeper, and 3 younger siblings who needed to eat every day. Kofi became the head of the family overnight. He had no choice. He rolled up his sleeves, took his father's old hoe, and walked to the fields before the sun was even fully awake. That was his life for many years. Wake up, work, come home tired, sleep, repeat. He did not dream of big things. He did not have the time. Dreams were for people who were not already exhausted by noon. The village people respected Kofi, but they also pitied him. They would watch him walk by and shake their heads gently. He was a good man, they said. A very good man, but life had not been good to him. Some of the older women would quietly leave a little extra food outside their doors when they knew he was passing, not wanting to embarrass him, but not able to watch him go hungry either. Kofi accepted these moments with a nod and a grateful smile. He was not a proud man in the wrong way. He understood the difference between receiving help with dignity and begging without it. And so he carried on, steady and silent, like a tree standing firm in a wind that never fully stopped blowing. The dry season that year was particularly cruel. The crops in Asare cracked and shriveled. The small river that used to run near the east side of the village had slowed to barely a trickle. Even the birds seemed to leave. The air was thick and hot, and everyone in the village moved slowly, as if the heat was pressing down on their shoulders. One evening, after a long and discouraging day in the fields, Kofi sat outside his house and looked at the sky. The stars were out, bright and countless. He thought about his father. He thought about his younger sister, who needed medicine they could not afford. He thought about the debt that was growing slowly, like a vine around the neck. That night, he could not sleep. Something restless moved inside him, a feeling he had never felt before. Not quite fear, not quite excitement. Something older than both. He lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling until the feeling became too strong to ignore. He got up, lit a small lantern, and walked. He walked without knowing where he was going. His feet seemed to carry him on their own, past the edge of the village, past the old mango tree where children played during the day, and into the long-abandoned field that the villagers called the old ground. Nobody farmed there, nobody walked there, not anymore. The elders said the old ground had been part of the original settlement of Asare, a sacred place that belonged to the ancestors. People left it alone out of respect, or perhaps out of a quiet fear they did not fully understand. Kofi had passed by that field his whole life without ever entering it. But that night, his feet took him right through the dry grass and into the middle of it. He stopped. There was a small mound of earth near the center of the field, barely visible, covered in old weeds and cracked soil. For some reason, Kofi knelt beside it. He set down his lantern, and with his bare hands, he began to dig. He did not know why. He would not be able to explain it afterward. He simply dug, slowly and carefully, the way a man digs when he is looking for something he is not sure he has lost. His fingers touched something hard. He stopped breathing for a moment. He carefully cleared the soil around it. What came out of the ground, slowly, piece by piece, as he brushed away the dirt, was an object unlike anything he had ever seen. It was heavy, made of something dark and old. It had markings on it, deep carvings that caught the light of his lantern and seemed, just for a second, to glow faintly, though he told himself that must have been his tired eyes playing tricks. He sat back on his heels and stared at it. He did not know what it was, but his whole body felt different. Something had shifted. The air around him was still, completely still, as if the world had paused to watch what he would do next. He wrapped the object in his old cloth and carried it home. He placed it under his mat and lay back down, but sleep still did not come. Not because of worry this time, because something in him felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely awake. The next morning, Kofi went to see the oldest man in the village, a man named Nana Boateng, who was 81 years old and remembered things that other people had forgotten. Nana Boateng sat in his usual chair outside his house, wrapped in a faded cloth, eyes half closed but never fully sleeping. Kofi sat across from him and placed the object on the ground between them. The old man opened his eyes fully for the first time in what seemed like years. He leaned forward. His hands, slow and trembling, reached out and touched the markings on the object. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he looked at Kofi with an expression that was hard to read, something between wonder and certainty. He said, in a low and steady voice, that the object was the relic of the Alpha King. Kofi did not understand what that meant at first, so the old man explained. Generations ago, before the village of Asare was even called Asare, this land was ruled by a great chief, a man so respected and so wise that people called him the Alpha King, meaning the first and the strongest. This chief had an object, a ceremonial relic, that was passed down through his bloodline as a symbol of authority and guardianship. When the colonial era came and the old ways were disrupted, the family scattered, the land changed hands, and the relic was buried in the old ground for safekeeping by the chief's descendants, with the intention of being retrieved when the right time came. But the people who knew about it passed away before they could pass the knowledge on, and so the relic had stayed in the ground, waiting, for nearly 100 years. Kofi listened to every word without speaking. When the old man finished, he asked one question. He asked, "Why him?" Nana Boateng smiled and said something that Kofi would remember for the rest of his life. He said that the earth does not give its secrets to the loudest person or the richest person. It gives them to the one who is still enough to listen. Proton. Within 2 days, people came to see the relic. Within a week, a historian from the city arrived, a serious woman with glasses and a worn leather bag full of notebooks. She examined the object carefully, took photographs, cross-referenced the markings with records she carried, and by the end of her 3rd day, she confirmed what Nana Boateng had already said. The relic was genuine. It was over 200 years old, and the markings on it matched documented descriptions of the Alpha King's royal emblems that appeared in colonial-era records. The historian also did something else. She ran a genealogy trace on Kofi's family name and origin, using records from the village elder registry and oral history documentation from the region. The result was something that left even her quiet for a moment before she could speak. Kofi Mensah was a direct descendant of the Alpha King's lineage. He was not just a man who found something, he was the man it had been waiting for. When the historian told him this, Kofi was sitting on the same worn bench outside his house, where he had sat every evening for years. He did not jump up. He did not shout. He sat very still, the way still water holds a reflection. Then he nodded slowly, as if some part of him, a very deep and quiet part, had already known. The months that followed were not easy. Big things rarely arrive without resistance. Government officials came and said the relic belonged to the National Heritage Authority. Lawyers appeared with documents. A local politician tried to use the discovery for his own publicity, holding press events near the old ground, as if he had something to do with it. One man, a distant relative Kofi barely knew, claimed he had equal rights to the relic, and tried to take the matter to court. Through all of it, Kofi remained calm. Not because he was weak, but because he had spent years being steady when everything around him was difficult. That was his training, even if he had not known it at the time. Every hard morning in the field, every night of worry, every moment of going without, had built something in him that no outside pressure could easily break. He found legal support through a non-profit organization that worked on cultural heritage rights. He found allies among historians, community leaders, and members of the diaspora community who had been researching the Alpha King's lineage for years from abroad and were overjoyed to find that the relic had surfaced. He gave interviews carefully, always speaking with respect, never with arrogance, and the public responded to that. People could sense that he was not performing. He was simply himself. The legal process took 14 months. At the end of it, a ruling was made that the relic would remain in the custody of the verified descendant lineage, meaning Kofi and his family, with the agreement that it would be properly preserved and made available for cultural documentation. The politician faded away. The distant relative dropped his claim. The government officials moved on to other matters. The relic stayed with its rightful owner. But what happened next was the part of the story that truly changed things. Kofi did not sit on his discovery. He did not frame it as personal glory. Kofi worked with the historian and the village elders to establish a small cultural center in Asare, a place where the history of the Alpha King's lineage could be documented, shared, and taught to young people in the area. The center brought jobs to the village. It brought visitors. It brought a road improvement project funded by a regional development body that had never paid attention to Asare before. A borehole was drilled, bringing clean water within walking distance. A small medical post was established nearby. The school, which had been running with barely any materials, received a donation of books and equipment from a university that had partnered with the cultural center. None of this happened because Kofi demanded it. It happened because he understood something important. He understood that what had been given to him was not just for him. He said this openly, in a community gathering that took place 1 year after the discovery, standing in the very field where he had knelt and dug in the middle of the night. He said he was not special because he found the relic. He was simply the one who had been put in the right place, at the right time, in the right state of heart. And what he intended to do with that was to make sure the people around him felt what it meant to matter. There was not a dry eye in that field. What did it feel like, they wanted to know. To go from a man with nothing to a man who carried the legacy of a king. Kofi always gave the same answer. He said that he did not feel like a different person. He felt like the same person, finally standing in the right light. All the years of hard work, patience, and quiet endurance had not been wasted time. They had been preparation. He just had not known what he was being prepared for. His mother, who had been sick for so long, received proper medical care and recovered slowly over the following year. She lived to see her son honored at a formal recognition ceremony, attended by regional leaders, cultural organizations, and community members from across the region. She sat in the front row in a bright yellow dress, watching her son stand tall in front of hundreds of people, and she did not try to stop the tears from falling. She had raised him in hardship and watched him hold on to his goodness through all of it. This moment was not a surprise to her. She had always believed something like this would come. She had just prayed she would live long enough to see it. She had. Dunka. Today, Kofi Mensah is known beyond his village. His story has been written about, discussed in academic circles, and shared widely as an example of cultural heritage, perseverance, and what it means to carry yourself with dignity, even when the world gives you very little reason to. But if you go to Asare on an ordinary morning, you might still find him in the field, not digging this time, just walking slowly through the rows of crops, checking on things, the way his father used to do. He still gets up early. He still moves quietly. He still greets the elders first before anyone else. The only thing that has changed is that the village around him is a little less forgotten now. The road is a little smoother. The children have a few more books. The water is a little closer, and the people walk with slightly more confidence than they did before, as if something in the air around Asare itself has shifted. Perhaps it has, because that is what happens when one person refuses to stop moving forward, even when the road is invisible, even when no one is watching, even when the night is long and the morning feels like it might not come. Something eventually shifts. The earth moves, and what was buried, what was always there, waiting quietly beneath the surface, finally rises. Not to make noise, but to find its home.